For those who don't know me, my name is Eugenio Refini. I'm the chair of the Department of Italian Studies and also the director of the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies here at NYU. And tonight's event is really part of three different sort of series in a way. Our lecture series in Italian Studies, but also a series on music and culture broadly meant, which I ran for the Department of Italian Studies, and then of course, given the topic, this is also under the umbrella of the Medieval and Renaissance Center. And I'm really happy to welcoming back to NYU Professor Luca Della Libera, who's a dear colleague based in Italy. He was with us a couple of years ago for a beautiful talk and event more broadly about Alessandro Melani's L'Empio Punito, which is an opera super interesting for the opera folks around here, based on the same story, which is then made popular by Mozart's Don Giovanni. But this kind of comes before Da Ponte and Mozart. And this is a work which Luca has been devoted much of his time over the past 10 years. Yeah.
No, 10 no.
No, well, yeah, but it was a big work. I mean, I've been
6.
following 6. Okay. Tonight, Luca is going to talk about the 17th century again, but different with a different focus. So the focus of tonight's talk is going to be space and sound in Baroque Rome, with particularly with a particular focus on the case of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza. We will also hear about Santa Maria Maggiore, and I think the big question to ask tonight is really, how does space impact the way in which composers compose, in particular for church music? That's the context of tonight's talk. Now, very briefly about Luca, because we will hear about the content of the talk from him directly. So Luca studied in Rome, where he's graduated in flute at the Conservatory of Santa Cecilia, and then in history of music at La Sapienza. He has a PhD from Roma Tor Vergata and the University of Mainz, on the topic of Alessandro Scarlatti's sacred music, which is a topic to which Luca has been going back over time. He has a monograph on the sacred music of Alessandro Scarlatti, which was published in Italian first in 2018, and then in English as The Roman Sacred Music of Alessandro Scarlatti with Routledge in 2022. He's a tenured professor of history of music in the Conservatory of Frosinone. I heard that we have some Frosinone friends in the room, which is wonderful. He has published on many different venues: Nuova Rivista Musicale Italiana, Rivista Italiana di Musicologia, Ricercare, Studi Musicali, and many more. As I mentioned, he's the editor of the critical edition of L'Empio Punito by Alessandro Melani, which came out with A&R in 2022. He has collaborated with performers on many different projects, of course, with a focus on Baroque music. He's just back to New York after a few days in Boston, where I think he was also involved in the performance of music which he has edited. So it's really my pleasure to welcome Luca back to Casa Italiana. So let's give him a round of applause, and the floor is yours.
Grazie.
I can go the other side, yeah.
Thank you very much, Eugenio. It's always a pleasure to stay here. The relationship between compositional choices and the spaces where specific repertoires were performed remains an area that requires further investigation. My talk begins with a comparison of a project conducted from 2010 and 2018 on the repertoire performed in the Church of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza, a masterpiece by Francesco Borromini, and the one I studied for the Pauline Chapel, Cappella Paolina or Cappella Borghese in Santa Maria Maggiore, one of the most significant sacred buildings of the Counter-Reformation Rome. By retrieving archival documents from the Archivio di Stato, I determined the vocal and instrument ensembles present in 6061 for the feast of dedication of Sant'Ivo on May 19. Orazio Benevoli's three-choir mass, Ecce, sacerdos, magnus, was likely performed on that occasion. The score, performed in a concert held in 2018 with the 3 choirs positioned according to the church's layout, respects Borromini's spatial design in its overall organization. In contrast, the situation is quite different for Alessandro Melani's repertoire sung in the Pauline Chapel. Here, the closer placement of the 2 choirs above the altar perfectly aligns with Melani's compositional choices, particularly regarding the treatment of the 2 choirs and the advanced harmony. Before illustrating the results of this research, I consider it worthwhile to summarize some indicative features of 17th century Roman sacred music and some architectural characteristics of Roman church. This premise is necessary, as will be better seen later, to highlight the particular situation of music in Sant'Ivo. The musical practice had received a powerful impulse from the demands of the Counter-Reformation already in the second half of the 16th century, with an enrichment of the liturgical repertoire and the establishment of stable groups of salaried singers in many churches and large basilicas. Their task was to ensure daily and festive musical services. From the same period, we find testimonies documenting 2 aspects of great importance: the polychoral nature and the presence of instruments. The first, derived from the North Italian musical tradition, is a particular type of musical writing which involves dividing performances into 2 or more groups and arranging them on wooden platform called chori. This choice aligns with the Baroque preference for redundancy, depth, and expressive amplification, which has an extraordinarily effective means of spatializing sound, a feature we will observe in the music at Sant'Ivo. Meanwhile, the presence of musical instruments in Roman churches persisted despite continuous prohibitions from the Roman ecclesiastical authorities in the late 16th century. The space allocated to music in churches has undergone many changes. In the first phase, which lasted several centuries, music had the choir area as its designated place. In contrast, from the mid-16th century, the practice of concerti negli organi was born, that is, the presence of singers and instrumentalists in the choirs. Organs and choirs were placed in the naves, transepts, or in the sides of the presbytery, in places visible from the assembly. In Rome, in the late 16th century, pairs of symmetrical and opposing choirs appeared, one for the organ and the other for the singers. In San Lorenzo in Damaso, here is the picture of the church in the Palazzo della Cancelleria, and here in Santa Maria Chiesa Nuova or Santa Maria Navicella, or in San Luigi dei Francesi, and here near the main altar, and at the entrance with this wonderful organ in San Luigi dei Francesi. Sant'Ivo is the only Roman church to have 3 cantorie, and not, as in all the others, 1 or 2, and a church of the few that not to have an organ. These are the 2 cantorie, and the third is in the main door. In the course of this research, no clues have emerged about the presence of this instrument in the church designed by Borromini. The Church of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza has been the subject of numerous studies regarding the rich symbolism and iconography that characterize it. In the wisdom literature, the concept is always linked to ascent. The fundamental characteristic of the wisdom theme linked to knowledge acquisition lies precisely in overcoming the horizontal dimension of knowledge. Christian theology can't strive for wisdom by the force of human capacities alone. One of the Church's fundamental architectural themes is its vertical development in the vertical ascent of space. The theme of ascent is the ultimate factor of knowledge. Every year on May 19, in celebration of Sant'Ivo's feast, musicians from various Roman institutions participated in a solemn liturgy attended by numerous cardinals. Among them, the chapel masters hired during the first decade of the church's establishment, Orazio Benevoli stands out as a prominent figure. These are the three cantorie in the corners of this triangle, and this is the autograph receipt of Benevoli in 1661. Io, Orazio Benevoli, ho ricevuto dall'illustrissimo reverendissimo signor canonico Marco Antonio Buratti scudi 10 moneta quali sono per la musica di una messa in Sant'Ivo nella Sapienza. In fede ho fatto la presente di mia propria mano. Questo di 30 maggio 1661. I found also this source. This is really very important, interesting. This is a list of the musicians of 60-61. Maybe I have to, because it's not very easy to. Messa per la festa di Sant'Ivo in 3 cori, 3 organi. And then the singers are divided into vocal range. Soprani, rodomonti di cappella, eccetera, eccetera. Poi alti di cappella di San Pietro. When we find di cappella, it means Cappella Sistina. It's a sort of like cappella was, for definition, there was no need to say Sistina. Alti, tenori, bassi, and then istrumenti. So we have 3 organs, Leonardo di San Giovanni, Bernardo della Chiesa Nuova. This is very famous. Bernardo Pasquini was a very famous musician. And then Giovannino del Signor Carlo, and then Arcangelo liuto, violino e violino. When we compare the documents with Sant'Ivo's particular structure, we immediately notice a clear correspondence. We recall that the Borromini's church has 3 cantorie, one in the entrance wall and the other on the sides. And for this reason, I've tried to put the singers in the right places, according to the document. We cannot know for sure which pieces were performed, but it is in any case possible to advance some hypotheses. A score that may have been performed at Sant'Ivo in 60-61 is the 3-choir Messa Ecce sacerdos magnus. Written by Benevoli in that year for 3 choirs, which belongs to the genre of the so-called messe cycliche. All the sections of the Mass are constructed from a single Gregorian melody. It should be noted that in the vibrant Roman sacred music production of the second half of the 17th century, there were very few pieces for 3 choirs. Benevoli's Mass can be indicative sample of the repertoire performed for Sant'Ivo and demonstrate how much the stylistic and compositional choices are in tune with the spatial dimension designed by Borromini. Before we listen to the music, I'd like to show you a very short video created by Italian television for that concert in 2018. Sorry, I need Eugenio's help.
Just need to get into
forse quella dopo, aspetta, eccola.
Questa?
Sì.
Let me make the screen.
Da 3 cantorie, 3 sorgenti sonore perfettamente equidistanti, nasce un intreccio di voci che scende dall'alto e risale al cielo, come un coro angelico. L'acustica è insolita e straordinaria che solo il genio personalissimo e rivoluzionario di Francesco Borromini ha saputo creare per la chiesa di Sant'Ivo, la Sapienza, tra le sue più importanti opere architettoniche. Un concerto straordinario eseguito dalla scuola romana Ensemble restituisce l'idea musicale originaria della messa a 3 cori di Orazio Benevoli, verosimilmente composta per l'inaugurazione della cappella.
A pochi metri da qua c'è l'Archivio di Stato e ho trovato i documenti che attestano il fatto che Benevoli avesse scritto questa messa a 3 cori nel 1661, l'anno in cui lui ha iniziato a essere chiamato a dirigere queste grandi liturgie. La chiesa di Sant'Ivo è l'unica chiesa romana ad avere 3 cantorie e quindi in qualche modo il compositore ha rispettato questo straordinario spazio, anzi lo ha esaltato, perché queste 3 cantorie sono collocate nei vertici di questo triangolo equilatero e quindi c'è anche proprio un discorso di attenzione alla geometria del luogo.
Borromini è stato per la sua vita un costruttore di spazi per la musica.
Perché questa chiesa è il suo capolavoro?
Perché qui è stato molto libero, perché in questo caso lavorava per la cappella dell'università. Diciamo che una delle interpretazioni è questa, che il modello sia il Pantheon, l'ha spiegato come si fa con la carta e quindi ha ottenuto un Pantheon gotico, potremmo dire, cioè uno spazio estremamente verticale. Questa verticalità forse è proprio l'elemento comune alla musica di Benevolo e all'architettura di Borromini.
E quindi ne guadagna anche l'acustica?
Secondo me sì.
Questo è un esempio davvero virtuoso. La ricerca d'archivio in qualche modo sfocia in un'esecuzione pubblica. Questo è quanto di meglio chi fa questo mestiere possa desiderare. Un po' di autopromozione non voluta. Ok. Sì, adesso mettiamo. Perfetto. A musical element, in my opinion, in close relation to Borromini's organization of space, is that the 3 choirs in the Mass have equal treatment. There is no sort of musical hierarchy. Each of them is a self-sufficient entity, or in architecture terms, self-supporting. In other words, each choir does not depend musically on the others. And it is interesting to note that this type of organization and distribution of sound flows is in complete harmony with Borromini's special choices. We can also listen the Agnus Dei, because of course we don't have time to discuss all the Mass, but just a few things about the Agnus Dei. There is a rhetorical strategy. The first time the 2 words Miserere Agnus Dei are set in a sort of quasi-syllabic style and then are repeated with the long melismas. The second time seems consistent with the church space, pure sounds give more of the feeling of immateriality and aspiration to heaven. The final invocation, Miserere Nobis, is the only point where we find a homophonic setting. We can listen. This is a live recording in the church, and of course we had a lot of problems for the singers. Can you imagine the singers singing in that place was very, very difficult at the beginning. Okay, we can go. Oops. Let's compare Sant'Ivo with another significant building, Santa Maria Maggiore. The Sistine and Pauline Chapels in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore represent two complex and significant ecclesiastical buildings in Counter-Reformation Rome. This is the famous main nave of the church. This is the Sistine Chapel on the right, and this is the Pauline Chapel. And the chapel was built around 1608 and 1612 by the Pope Paul V Borghese. These are some pictures of the cantorie. These are very close to the main entrance, and this is the wonderful cupola. And a very interesting thing I found, maybe the colleagues know, but I didn't know that in the cupola there is a painting of l'Assunta by Cigoli. He was a Florentine painter, and he was a friend of Galileo Galilei, you know. And I didn't know that the moon here has the discoveries by Galileo. So it's not cinemacula, it's not, but it has a lot of maculae. It's very so interesting to remind that, of course, the patron was Scipione Borghese, so probably he knew that. But it's interesting. It's interesting to remember. And the most crucial portrait preserved in this chapel is the Virgin of St. Luke, also known as Salus Populi Romani, the savior of the Roman people. According to tradition, the portrait has legendary origins. It was created by the Apostle Luke and may have ever been completed by angels. Accepted as an image not crafted by human hands, it is regarded as a relic that can bestow grace and miracles. For instance, we know that also during the lockdown, the Pope visited many times, and the Pope declared that he wanted to be buried there. And a very, very new decision, not very. Because, of course, not in the Vatican. On October 1615, Pope Paul V issued the bull Immense Bonitas, which recognized the chapel as an official ecclesiastical institution dedicated to the Virgin. And of course, in this chapel, we have a lot of wonderful. This is the grave of the Pope Paul V. In 1615, Cardinal Scipione Borghese approved the statuti of the chapel, and in this statuti it was also present a musical ensemble, a choir named Salve. Here is the information just before the entrance of the chapel. You can hear litanie cum antifone in laudem capella canuntur and so on. The choir consisted of 4 sopranos, 2 altos, 2 tenors, and 2 basses. The devotional service, the 40 hours, occurred during the last 3 days of Carnival, commemorating Christ's 40 hours in the grave. During this service in the Pauline Chapel, wooden structures called the macchine were used to hold the monstrance, which were richly decorated and illuminated by many candles. And we know that very important artists were involved. For instance, this is a bill of Pietro da Cortona, working for these 40 hours. So the visual aspect was very, very important. We know that in the Pauline Chapel, not only Pietro da Cortona, but also Gian Lorenzo Bernini worked to build this macchine. All the documents of this institution are preserved in the Archivio Borghese, Fondo Borghese, in the Archivio Apostolico Vaticano. It was a private choir of the family, because the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore had his choir, but this is totally different. It's absolutely a private institution. Here we can see the positions of the Pauline Chapel inside the Basilica and the position of the cantorie in the chapel. This is the entrance, this is the altar with the image of Salus Populi Romani, and these are the two cantorie for the singers, very close to the altar, and these are the two cantorie just the entrance of the chapel. And also we have okay. This is another picture, and this is also very nice. The singers with probably the maestro here in the cantorie, in an ancient book of the Basilica. Here we have a list of the musicians involved in the Salve in 1688. We have some names are very famous, but Bernardo Pasquini was also the organist of the Basilica. Giuseppe Fede was the Don Giovanni of L'Empio Punito, was a soprano castrato who was employed also to sing the opera. And then here we have the autographs, the received autograph of Alessandro Melani for that year. Here, so we have the musicians, the singers are divided into choirs, but the cantorie are very, very close. Totally, the situation is very different, of course, if we compare to that of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza. And for this lecture, I have chosen a score that represents this institution's repertoire, the Litanie per la Beata Vergine. The text of the Litanie per la Beata Vergine encloses in one summary all the hope, love, and devotion towards the Virgin, and all the virtues, attributes, adjectives, and functions attributed to her from the theology. So how does Melani's music follow the alternation between the passionate and assertive demonstrative sections? I forgot. This is just to have an idea of the space. Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza, the cantorie in Sant'Ivo and le cantorie in Santa Maria, in the Pauline Chapel. Okay, the litanie now. I try to summarize the rhetorical scheme of this, the text of the litanie. So it's always a sort of alternation between passionate and assertive elements. In the first case, the exordium, the text, the difference between the penitence rite and the Trinity invocations is a heightened with a contrast between the contrapuntal writing and the richer harmony of the first one, and the more homophonic texture in the second. And we can hear. I have to jump. This is a Santa Maria, the last part of the first section. And just to have an idea of the kind of powerfulness of this music. No, sorry. Okay, I have just to come back. The assertive nature of the second section, which begins with mater, is realized mainly with homophonic and imitative writing. The last verses of this section move towards a more melismatic style. And the allegorical invocations of the digressio here that begin with Salus infirmorum. The first two verses are set for two choirs and have a firm homophonic texture, reminding the setting of Santa Maria. And the section ends with a rich contrapuntal episode for all the voices on Ora pro nobis. And also here we can listen auxilium, just the last part. No, here we listen all the section. The fourth section of the text, which we can consider the confirmatio, is this one. No, this. Okay. List of the Virgin's royal features. Melani respects the text's assertive nature, with very short homophonic episode for few voices until the last verse, Regina Sanctorum Omnium, set for two choirs. As regards to the Agnus Dei, the passionate atmosphere is achieved here by solo episodes. The first one for the first two verses sung by Canto Primo and Canto Secondo of the first choir, followed by the tenor who sings the beginning of the third verse, followed by a delicate counterpoint sung by alto and bassus. The last verse is set for both choirs in homophony, achieving a moving atmosphere in the Miserere Nobis, with seventh and ninth chords suspensions. And this is, I think, this is one of the most impressive means of Italian music, sacred music, in my opinion. The ideological program of the chapel, expressed in the works of art, is closely related to the Salve choir. There is a strong connection between the musical repertoire and the Pauline Chapel, particularly when considering Melani's music within this articulated religious and cultural context. The singers who performed the Salve services mostly belonged to the Cappella Pontificia. The Salve ensemble became a subset for that institution, often compared to a choir of angels. In this context, the choice of papal singers for the Salve emphasized the symbolic importance of the music in the Pauline Chapel and its association with the angelic aspects of the portrait of the Virgin. The music repertoire was written for 2 choirs and sung with 1 voice assigned to each part. This is a very particular case among the Roman sacred institutions, and it contributed to the unique sounding landscape of the Pauline Chapel. The rhetorical scheme of the texts and Melani's music, with advanced harmony for its moment, follow the ideological, cultural, and religious message of the Pauline Chapel. It was unique within the Roman sacred music of the time, illustrating the strong symbolic and visual impact given to the pilgrims who visited the chapel, for which an indulgence was given if they listened to this music. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. I mean, this is such a fascinating. It makes me want to go back to Rome as soon as possible. I think I've only been into Sant'Ivo once without music and only for a few seconds, because it's not an easy place to get into. And I know that there are other people around here who have spent time in Rome, but it's not the easiest church to visit.
Yes.
Whereas Santa Maria Maggiore is a little more accessible. But thank you for this journey through these 2 wonderful spaces. I have a couple of comments and questions, and then I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. But I think what is particularly interesting to me, at least in this presentation, is this notion that, of course, we do have only some examples of music which was composed for a specific place, and when we try to bring back that music into the space for which the music was composed, I think we get to understand better the score, but also the space. I mean, I think this notion that an exercise like the one which you have done is of relevance not only to musicologists or music lovers, but also, of course, to art historians of architecture, and more broadly of scholars of early modern culture, seems to me very important. I know that some work in this sense has been done for Venice as well. I think of the works of, gosh, I'm tired tonight. This colleague based at St. Andrews, Laura Moretti, who has who has done work on the architecture of the Venice churches, looking at where the cantorie and the choirs were disposed. And so, I mean, I think there's something very fascinating about this notion of rediscovering music while also learning something more about the actual material space in which they were in which the music was composed. And the question which comes to my mind is connected to what you have shown. So, you were mentioning that you tried, when you did the concert in Sant'Ivo, to place the musicians in the
beginning. Yes.
So of course we don't really know where the people were staying, and I'm wondering whether you can tell us a little more about the process of deciding where to have those singers, those musicians. When you have the music and then you have the space, we know that one is probably made for the other, but then for the modern performance context, how did you, possibly with the help of the musicians, but how did you manage to really make decisions about how to perform the music in Sant'Ivo?
Okay, no, I mean, the situation I have just to show you, where is the list and the Ecco. This is according to the list of musicians that I found in archive. I was able to put the singers in the three cantoriers, but of course this was not the case in our concert, because of course the musicians were the number of the musicians was more musicians, and of course it was really difficult. The first days of the rehearsals were a disaster for the singers, because they were not absolutely used to sing, and for the poor conductor, you know, it was a disaster also to have the possibility to understand each other, to connect the movement of the conductor with the voices. So it took a very long time to
synchronize.
Yes, to synchronize and to feel used to this kind, because it's absolutely something new for the musicians. So I think it's very important also to do these things again, because they are absolutely not used, these singers. And of course they decided to be not exactly with the same numbers of this document, because is not possible. It didn't work very well, so decided to have more. I think the soprani were 3 or 4 for each choir.
This is so interesting, because of course I think it also speaks to the fact that we are trying to go back to 17th century music in the context of the liturgical space, but of course we go back to our own mind, which is also used to different kinds of sounds. I mean, I think this is an important aspect. We tend to think that music sounds in a certain way, but it didn't sound the same way, if you go back 3 or 4 centuries ago. And so to find the right compromise is not easy. The other thing which I wanted to ask is about whether we have maybe detailed descriptions or accounts of people who happened to listen to music, for instance, in Sant'Ivo, and who maybe, sort of indirect sources, let's say travelers who get to Rome and they tell something about, I attended a concert in Sant'Ivo or a mass, and this is what I heard. Do we have documents of that kind?
For Sant'Ivo we don't have any information. But also the problem, I mean, for the dedication feast, I found the information for the come si dice, la consecration. We know that the singers from the Sixtine Chapel were there, but we don't have, for this kind of feast, we don't have information like Avvisi or Cronache. And there, I forgot to say also that another very important aspect, Sant'Ivo didn't have a fixed group of musicians, so they always asked to musici forestieri. There was not a daily practice, so this is also very, very different from Santa Maria Maggiore.
Okay, yes, Luis, who's also very expert in Sant'Ivo.
Well, I wanted to pick up on your first question. So the 2 sopranos per choir didn't work. Why? They didn't make enough sound, or what?
Yes, was a problem of voice, and they were not used to sing in this new space for them.
Right, but how does it help to add more voices in that situation?
I think
It would have been interesting to hear, with the numbers, because that's one thing that has changed so much.
Yes.
We're used to bigger musical forces.
I don't remember exactly how many people. I think there were not. It was not very different from the original. I think maybe just the sopranos were reinforced.
I have another question, which is to do with the cantorie. The print you showed us of the Cappella Paolina with the musicians. At that stage, it just had a balustrade, but was otherwise open. And now they have these screens.
Yes, I don't know.
What are those screens for? You see them often in these choir.
Sorry?
The screens?
Yes, gelosie.
Gelosie, yeah. Why do they have the gelosie?
Because the assembly had to not to look at the singers.
Why?
Because they were distracted from the.
Print there were no gelosie.
I don't remember in which period this happened, but there was a sort of prohibition to have a visual contact with the music. So it was something about, cultural.
They must postdate polychoral music, though, because it's bad enough that you're trying to synchronize with someone across the width of the church, but then in addition.
There was also this problem because the singers had to see each other.
Crazy.
I know.
And the conductor at Sant'Ivo, was he over the door?
Yes, the beginning of the rehearsal, we tried to put him down,
In the middle.
but it was a disaster. It looked like a pizzardone, So we decided that he had to stay over the first.
Central.
The central, yes, over the main door of the church.
Screens. I mean, if you had used computer screens, so that they could have seen him without the time delay, might have helped.
Excuse me, Luca. Weren't the gelosie so that the music sounded disembodied? The flock wouldn't see people, would just hear this music like we heard it now without seeing anybody. It was almost come si dice sacra, un'esperienza sacra.
Sacred, yes.
Religiosa.
Yes.
Oh.
I think it was. They wanted this. They wanted something that, without the element of the visual element
Physical.
Yes, the physical element.
Did you remember when they put the gelosie?
I don't remember, but I know that the church is in this period prefer to cover the singers, and because the sound comes from God.
Yes, this is the point.
Would the sound have been muffled, reduced, because of the baffle?
Good question. I don't know.
It's a cloth screen, right?
No,
I think it's done. It's wood. I think it's wood,
Oh,
right?
okay, got it.
it's not solid, but it would, for sure, somewhat muffle the sound.
Sound will go over.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Right. As a fellow flutist, I know one of the frustrations of playing in a church is the duration of the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if Borromini considered the problem of echo and duration of the sound by using various elements, say, for example, softness of the stone, how far above the listeners it is, the height to the top of the church. There's so many elements that may control the duration of the sound. As you know, like in New York, when there's a concert at Alice Tully Hall, they have these wooden panels to depth the sound. So that's one part of the question. I want to take advantage of your great knowledge. And the other part of the question is, did you discover any of these secrets of Borromini, or did the singers? I know that sometimes you're in a new church and you say, oh my gosh, this was made for this kind of music because of this and this feature. So did the singers, in your opinion, discover some mysteries or some hidden features of Borromini's design during this experience?
We don't have any. I don't have any information about the relationship between the materials in the Borromini space and the music. so it's very difficult to answer. And then I think that this the result of this research is, I mean, in this case, it's clear that if you hear this music in a normal concert house, concert hall, the result is boring, I think, because it's very schematic. It's very, there are absolutely no nuance or suspension. So it's very, very
gets flat, right? I mean, I guess
exactly.
It's one of the interesting, I think, again, even if you're not sure about so many things, but the idea of listening to this music, you know, sort of in the church with stimuli coming from these 3 points, of course, the experience is different than having the 3 choirs singing together from the palco, or, you know, from whatever sort of more regular traditional way of putting them around. And I think there's this notion that the sound gets to be sort of multidimensional in a way, and if you are in the middle, you get really these at least 3 main flows of sounds coming your way.
Antiphonal.
Yes. So, which of course is also different from the Santa Maria Maggiore, where instead you only have 2.
Yes.
There's a question.
Yeah, no, lovely, David. Thank you very much. I think it also helps to answer what's been a kind of a long-running historiographical paradox, because when, you know, in the 18th century, they're sort of setting up this idea of there was this period, the Baroque, when everything went, you know, went to hell. You know, it began with architecture, right? They said, you know, Borromini went into, Venezia was saying Borromini went into delirium and so forth. And then they added poetry, okay, Marino's kind of like that. But then they said, you know, music doesn't really fit. I mean, even Algarotti was saying, you know, those 17th century chords, they were really good. They just had to settle that crappy poetry. But then as the 19th century wore on, they sort of said, well, there were some exceptions. Okay, you know, those big complex canons by Valentini, yeah, that's kind of Baroque. He was kind of a Baroque guy, but that's an exception. And he would, and then Benevoli would sometimes get pulled into this because they, you know, that monumental, these kind of Baroque. But what's interesting is it depends. If you hear it in a concert hall, it's actually the textures are quite simple, which I think he had to do to avoid if the textures are too complicated in that, they're going to just cancel each other out. But when you hear it here, it does become kind of Baroque. I mean, it complements the space so nicely, and it becomes that kind of, it complements that kind of twisty Borromini aesthetic. But without that, if you just look at the score, you can kind of say, this is kind of simple. You know,
you are absolutely right. I did così fa qua, aspetta. No, scusate. If sorry. Here the music is absolutely simple. So just
every profile is very simple. It's
if you hear
dumbed down Palestrina.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's beautiful in its own way, but it's funny if you just look at that without the context. You say, all right, well, maybe Algarotti was right that music was different with respect to it's not very Baroque at all. But then it since it's conceived for spaces like that, it suddenly takes on this extra. Gets a una marcia in più.
Esatto.
Right. Any other questions for Luca? Well, I would like to thank Luca again for sharing this research.